Welcome back to Story Hustler Murder Mayhem PTSD. I'm Dylan.
And I'm Mike.
Like and subscribe. Got that out of the way.
Off the top.
Well, we have another exciting episode with a couple special guests. We have with us today Matt Smith and Gary Engels. Welcome. Thank you for talking with us today. And why don't you introduce them and get a little background?
Well, listen, I want to get into the story, so I'm going to keep the background and intro brief. These two guys are a couple of gentlemen who I grew to respect and admire as much as anybody that I encountered during the course of my career. And I'll just say that in the history of the now long and winding FLDS Warren Jeffs Short Creek saga, these guys played a role that was really unlike any others, and really set in motion the first serious criminal investigations into all kinds of wrongdoing. These guys are responsible for starting the first serious look at Colorado City after generations, and the prosecutions and the investigations that they started led to Warren Jeffs being incarcerated, led to the newest series of trials that are about to commence. And with that, I just want to, Matt, once upon a time, many years ago, you decided that it was, as the county attorney, you needed to take a more serious look at Colorado City and Hilldale. Why did you do that? And how did you get Gary to sign on to be the one and only cop up there?
As far as my initial involvement, I had already heard about things over the years. Of course, you'd have to be a dinosaur not to know some of the things that were going on up there. But I remember that Gary took a trip with local media personality Richard Kaffenberger, who I think also was the city manager at one time in Lake Havasu City. Mm-hmm. He went up there to check things out and do a spot, and he took Gary up there just for security. And when Gary came back, being a longtime friend and somebody I worked with for years, he told me all about what happened and what he saw up there, and he was very concerned about it. So when I ended up moving from being a prosecutor to county attorney, I heard a lot from people in Mojave County about their concerns about what was going on. And so I thought it needed to be looked into, and Gary was the perfect person because I trusted him, knew he was an excellent investigator. Plus, he had been up there and he knew a lot about what was going on. So that was why I tried to get him and was able to get him through the board of supervisors to start investigating these cases.
When was that, Matt?
It would have been in 2004 was when I started as the county attorney, January 1st of 2004. So I'm going to say, Gary, do you remember?
Yeah, I was hired on in October of 2004.
Yeah. Gary, let me just, what motive, in essence, Matt was hiring you to be the one and only independent outside law officer walking a beat up in Colorado City and Hilldale where everybody hated you. And you're the only guy, the only backup law enforcement you had was the town marshal's office, and those guys were Warren's people. What motivated you to take that crazy job?
Well, it interested me and what was going on up there. And, nobody had taken a serious look at the place in 50 years.
Right.
And from what I found out, I thought, well, this would be an interesting job. Little did I know. But I also wanted to get back into working as an investigator, and I wanted to work for Matt because when I was a police officer, we worked a lot of cases together, and we got convictions on everything we worked.
Gary, give us some sense. When you took the job, what did that mean for your life? You got your wife and your home elsewhere in Arizona. When you signed on to that job, what did that entail?
Well, it entailed me having to go up there, and because it was so far away, I had to live up there. And so I spent 24/7. I'd spend 3-4 weeks, maybe more sometimes, just staying up there. And my wife would come up and stay with me when she could. And then every once in a while, I'd come down here because I needed to have a meeting with Matt and stuff. But it just entailed me staying up there constantly in order to and being there 7 days a week to try to develop leads and people to talk to.
And so people again sort of appreciate the history. Your work led to the very first charges ever filed against Warren Jeffs. We've now had a history of trials and things. But again, Gary, you alluded to the fact that these guys were basically hands off for about 50 years. Law enforcement and politicians didn't want to touch that following the notorious 1953 raid. Nobody from the outside had given it a serious long-term look like you guys did. You start this. What are the kind of crimes? What are the things you uncovered, both Matt and Gary? And how did you proceed? Not a lot of people were willing to work with you, Gary, when you went up there.
That's true. I mean, I was up there by myself. The sheriff's department here does have officers up there, but they don't generally go into that Colorado City area much because they had their own police department. So I was up there by myself. I had an office, and I worked out of that office for several years. And just a matter of being there every day, moving around town, talking with people, trying to get names of people that might talk to me, and going just as you would do an investigation, just move from one lead to another. My biggest hamper up there was the local law enforcement. They had arrest authority, and I ended up having to have my information redacted and sealed so they couldn't get their hands on it.
Wow. Gary, were you, I know you're a brave guy and you're gonna, oh shucks this, but were you ever fearful for your safety?
I wouldn't say I was fearful. I was concerned a few times, but I was never afraid.
Yeah. Matt, give us some sense of, given Gary's work and your focus on this, what were the initial? I mentioned the fact that you guys brought the first charges against Warren. He ended up passing it along to better jurisdictions with better cases, but you started that, and you also charged 8 men, followers of Warren Jeffs, which I think was a very significant case. And again, build on everything that's followed this is really build on what you guys did. Talk about your initial charging of Warren and the Colorado City 8, as we used to call them.
I think that for us, the focus was always about the underage marriages and the sexual relations that we found out about between much older men and younger women that were under the age of 18. And so it was not about polygamy or about attacking the people that live up there, their way of life.
Right.
And I think that was important. It was something also that you had to keep in mind with what happened back in 1953, as you brought up, Mike.
Yeah.
So basically, without any cooperation from their law enforcement, from the marshal's office at that time, which things have changed now,
Big time. Yeah.
Gary developed the leads, found a couple of expert witnesses, including Richard Holm, who was instrumental in providing expert testimony in the cases. But it really came down to birth and marriage certificates because the victims themselves were so indoctrinated in the culture that they were not willing to talk to us, and their family would ostracize them if they did talk to us. So it came down to birth and marriage certificates showing that in Arizona, you can only legally be married to one person. So, establishing, as you said, the Colorado City 8, if you could show that these men were already married legally to a woman, and then through birth certificates that they were, in fact, obviously the father of a child with a girl that was under the age of 18 at the time she got pregnant, and just using those certificates and expert testimony for the charges and for the 3 jury trials that we did. And then it was Gary's work working with Richard Holm and some other witnesses that led to the possibility of charging Warren Jeffs with conspiracy charges for and for sexual conduct with a minor, for being the one who facilitated and arranged the marriages with these men and the women. So again, there was no direct testimony from the people involved. It was expert testimony that the only way this could have happened is if Warren Jeffs said it was going to happen.
Right, and
Well,
go ahead.
kind of going off that now with the new revelation, they're going to start up these new marriages. I guess from the court system side of things, like, how do you guys think he's able to still communicate so well with his outside community and supporters? Like, why is he able to communicate?
He's able to communicate because he has visitors that he communicates with, and I'm pretty sure he still has attorneys. And that's the way he used to get his information out of the jail, is through his attorneys. They would relay anything he wanted them to relay.
Are you gentlemen familiar with? There's a nephew, Heber Jeffs, that's now facing kidnapping charges up in Utah for allegedly absconding with kidnapping a 10-year-old girl. This is the latest and is the latest development in the sort of the courtroom saga of this. But again, it seems to me his behavior, he reacts to the way he's been prosecuted in the past and finds a new way to. Are you guys familiar with that, or are there
Well, he
lessons
was
to be?
told by Warren too.
Yeah,
So,
and the allegations are that this kidnapping was ordered by Warren. What insights, having investigated these cases from the get go, what do you think about these new developments?
Well, I didn't know that he'd even been arrested until you told me. The FBI, we had two meetings with the FBI on Sam Bateman,
Right.
and we discussed the other one, but after that, we never heard another word from him.
Yeah.
And so we have no idea what they're doing. But
Um, give me the sense, because I do think you guys sort of laid out the blueprint. Would be established. The Colorado City 8 was a very significant case, and did that precede the Warren Jeffs indictment, or the charges you put against Warren? It was a sort of a building process into charging Warren.
no, he was charged at the same time we were indicting these others.
Okay, so altogether, by that, so obviously, Gary, by that point, you had established some pretty good contacts and put together cases that had finally allowed Matt to go into court.
Yeah, we'd managed to put enough information together that we could get an indictment on him through grand juries. And then eventually we ended up going to trial on him, and we won our trials. And then we also gave some of them plea bargains.
And you guys sort of found some of the pivotal people, that Alyssa Wall, I think, who became, was so instrumental in the Utah case. These are people that, is that correct, Gary, that you had helped find some of these folks and get them and communicated with them?
Yes, Elisa Wall, I had first found out about her through her husband.
Yeah.
He was telling me about her situation. And so I waited and bided my time to try to make contact with her, because at the time he didn't want me talking to her because she was pregnant. And
Yeah.
so eventually I ended up passing that information on to Utah, and they eventually pursued the case with Roger Houle, because she sought out Roger Houle, and
Yeah.
he's the one that worked out the case that they would go with the Utah.
Yeah, let me. We were both talking about, with your long histories. What are your you look back at your greatest achievements in following through on this, and on the flip side, what are your greatest disappointments?
Well, our greatest achievement is that we actually accomplished something up there when nobody else had. We actually managed to prosecute these people. Another achievement that I'm proud of is we managed to get rid of a corrupt police department. I'm really happy about that. And you go up there to the town today and look at it, it doesn't look anything like it did, and they don't behave anything like they did. It's becoming a fairly modern town, as you know, because you've been there now.
Right, but all what you say is true, and the change of the guard of the law enforcement that in the town marshals was so important.
That was a big thing.
Big thing.
Without that happening, then we wouldn't have got the changes that are up there now.
In many
That
ways.
and that and the getting control of the UEP.
Right, right. Matt, Gary, biggest disappointment. Matt, again, you're not off the hook. I want to hear what you say about this, but the biggest disappointment, Gary.
Well, I think the biggest disappointment is we didn't actually prosecute Warren. Our cases were drug and drug on, and then what is it, Texas Texas came out and they'd have a big deal, and they had much better charges than we had.
Right.
And our victims and witnesses were starting to get tired of everything, and we were having a little bit of trouble, with eliciting their cooperation, mainly with a witness. And so we made our decision that we'd be better off releasing Warren to Texas, and they hammered him.
Oh, yes, they did. Well, I know that you guys got him into a courtroom because I was there that day in Kingman when they brought Warren down from Utah. When the history is written, the first charges ever filed against Warren Jeffs were brought by Matt Smith and Gary Engels. Matt, what your greatest accomplishment you think in this whole saga, and your biggest disappointment?
The biggest accomplishment, which I give most of the credit to Gary, because he's the one who gave up a lot of his life and made a lot of sacrifices to make this happen and put in an unbelievable amount of time. You're not talking about 40-hour weeks. You're talking about 100, 120-hour weeks at times. But for me, it was always about the underage marriages and stopping that. So it wasn't about polygamy or going after people for their way of life. It was about the underage marriages. And I think through Gary's work that for a very long period of time stopped up there, where they stopped doing that. And so these young girls who had no idea what they were getting into, I can't even imagine what it'd be like to be assigned to marry a guy that's 20, 30, 40 years older, not ever having experienced sexual relations with anybody, and having to face a wedding night.
Right.
I can't even imagine the trauma. So I think that was the biggest accomplishment. As far as uh, the other side of it, same thing that Gary said. Would have loved to have had Warren Jeffs in a courtroom and actually done a trial. But when we all met and we discussed who was going to go first, the victim of the case that went in Utah was younger in Utah than she was when things happened to her in Arizona. So for that reason alone, they had more serious charges. They did the trial. He was convicted there. And then when we had our charges going on, the victim and her sisters and everyone else didn't want to go through it again and didn't see the need. And then in the meantime, Texas had actual, okay, now it's not Warren arranging something, but it's actually him having sexual relations with a much younger girl. I can't remember, I think she was 12 that he got pregnant. So that would be the biggest disappointment, but it wasn't a huge disappointment because everybody worked together and the end result is that he's in prison.
Right, and
So,
but it's I think that if I don't want this to get lost in history, basically the role of you two guys, and I think a lot of people are now doing documentaries and telling this story, and the role you gentlemen played, I think, is so important. All of this started with Gary going up there and doing some serious, old-fashioned, shoe leather kind of law enforcement up there that had never occurred. And all of these investigations sort of build on each other. You guys were gracious enough, and everybody was smart enough to let's give it to the jurisdiction that has the best case. But you spell out all the obstacles, and I've seen this with every trial, every thing I've seen with this story, people not wanting to cooperate, being afraid to cooperate. Time drags on and they get sick of it. You got the jurisdictional issues. Did it happen in Utah or Arizona? You guys just faced a mountain trouble, and you still put together the early prosecutions, the early cases that I think built to everything that came after that started with you guys. And that really is the bottom line as I see the history.
I think that you're overlooking your role in it, Mike, and the fact that you and people like Flora Jessup and Carolyn Jessup
Right.
shed light on this, and it was because of that it generated a lot of interest throughout Mojave County, which then was, brought to my attention. If you hadn't shed that light on what was going on up there, I don't know if any of this would have happened in the first place. But it's investigative reporters that looked at this. Uh, that's what caused the impetus for something to be done.
Yeah, well, whatever hand we all had in it, I guess. If Flora once said, "It gets better one child at a time," and whatever hand any of us may have had in that, that's good, good. But
It
I,
wasn't just a one person thing. We couldn't have done it by ourselves. We couldn't have done it without getting the publicity you gave us and others. And that publicity is what sparked federal governments to want to get involved and help us, and other police agencies to get involved and want to help us. If I hadn't had all that, I wouldn't have gotten near as far. But I went up there and I sacrificed 10 years.
it
And
was it. I was going to ask you how.
Wow.
What was the run you had up there? Was it a full decade, Gary?
yeah, it was 10 years.
Well, hey,
Crazy.
listen. If I know you're retired, you deserve it, dude. At this point, you deserve it.
Well, he keeps calling me back to do more stuff.
Yeah, well, I listen. I have every faith in the world that you guys. We've not heard the last of you two. Certainly glad. What do you? They've been part of our dinner conversations now throughout your life. So
Yes, I've heard about you guys growing up, so it's
Oh,
fantastic to finally meet you and get to talk to you.
Very
No,
nice meeting you, and it's good to see you again, Mike, as well.
well, no doubt. I hope we don't pass it, kick the can down the road another 5 years. But best wishes to you guys.
yeah,
This is a trip down memory lane and an education that I'm just grateful that my daughter can hear.
well,
yes.
we're glad to be of help. Anytime we can help you, let us know.
All right. Well, listen, you gentlemen, take care of yourselves. Best wishes, and you got my admiration.